Oh, hello there. You're here for the video on the differences and similarities between English, German, and some Scandinavian languages? Well, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Liquidity. Liquidity. One of the things I find fascinating about languages is how they may be related to each other, how they are part of a family of languages, how they develop, and how sometimes a language splits off into several languages, and then sometimes languages converge, or languages loan words from each other, and sometimes even grammar in some cases. So one of the burning questions, or one of the related questions, is that how closely are languages related to one another if they're part of the same language family, and whether people can understand each other, whether people can more easily learn each other's languages if they're closely related. And with my background as a native German speaker and someone who's lived most of his adult life in North America and who speaks English every day and who has studied a little bit of Norwegian and Swedish on Duolingo mostly, so I'm mostly interested in how these languages, these Germanic languages, modern Germanic languages, are related to one another. So German and English belong to the Western Germanic language group, and the Scandinavian languages, such as Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, and then a few other ones, they belong to the Northern Germanic language family. So in this video, I'm just going to go over a few words that I will compare, words that may be surprising, words that might be surprisingly close and similar, and then others that are surprisingly dissimilar, and then maybe also why that might be. The first word is also a beverage, beer or ale in English, and in Scandinavian languages there is really just one word for it. It's just spelled a little bit differently depending on which language you're talking about, and it's pronounced öl. So in Swedish we have the O with the two dots on it, and in Norway and in Denmark we have the O with the line, the diagonal line through it. Those letters symbolize the sound Ö, more or less. Very similar to the German O with the two dots on it. So those are very similar. In German we have the word beer, which is of course very, very similar to the English word beer, but we also have a different kind of beer, a beer that's actually brewed very much like an ale, or exactly like an ale, and that would be called alt, or Altbier. However, the sources that I have referenced all say that this is actually not related to the English word ale or the Scandinavian word öl. I don't know if that's accurate or not. It just refers to, Altbier refers to an old way of brewing before the lager method was invented and perfected. Because most German beers are lager beers because they're actually cold fermented in cold storage places, in cellars. Let's look at another combination of words that have some funny letters in them, and that would be the words for clothes. So in Norwegian, for instance, we have the word klær, which is spelled with this letter, which is kind of a combination of those two letters, and it's pronounced more or less like an A, very much like the German letter A with the two dots on it, which is also an A. And in Swedish, we actually have it spelled with an A with two dots on it, kläder. And in Danish, it would be also kläder, but spelled with the same letter that the Norwegians use. And in German, we have the word Kleidung, which is more closely related to the Scandinavian words, but a little bit different. Here's an important one, time. How do you say time in Scandinavian languages and in German? So in Scandinavian languages, it's pretty much consistently tid, maybe pronounced a little bit differently depending on what part of Scandinavia you're in. The Danes tend to really drop off parts of the words, and the Swedes tend to pronounce vowels in very intricate ways, and the Norwegians are somewhere in between those. And in German, we have the word Zeit, which may not seem related to time or tid, but actually the sound ts used to be pronounced like a t, and the German letter that looks like an English Z is actually a z, so it's actually a plosive, very, very closely related to the letter T. So there you can see the relationship. Tid and Zeit is very, very closely related, more so than time, which might actually be more closely related to Latin, tempora. How about a simple word like and? So the English word and in Scandinavian would be either o or ok, depending on which language. So in Norwegian and in Danish, it's spelled OG, but it's pronounced more or less like an O. The G is kind of silent, I would think. And in Swedish, it's ok. And in German, it looks closer to the English, but it's spelled with a U, so it's und. Und. Oh, here's one that cracks me up, actually. And that's just because I also know German. So the Scandinavian words for old would be either gammal or gammal, depending on which language you're talking about. In German, we have the word alt, which is closely related to the English word old, but we also have the adjective vergammelt, which means left alone, rotten, or no good, something that's just so old you can't use it anymore. We also have the verb gammeln, which means to really be lazy, to just laze around, basically. So when I hear the Scandinavian word for old, I always think of people lazing around or things going bad or something, which to me is funny, but maybe not to you. Anyways, so interesting connections, obviously related to one another, but the connotations are quite different. Oh, let's look at this one too. So the Norwegian word for open is open. And I'm using this also because we have this fun A with the circle on top, and I want to talk about that one too. So in English we have open, in Norwegian it's open, and in German we have the word offen. We also have geöffnet, which means like open for business, kind of. We also have auf, which is a little bit more colloquial. So you can see the relationship between those two words. Now, why do Scandinavian languages, and actually all of them have, why do all Scandinavian languages have that extra letter, the A with the circle on top of it? That is kind of in between an A and an O sound, sort of like the A in the letter ball, A. So they have an extra letter that expresses or that represents that all sound. Here's a fun one. The Swedish and Norwegian word for, and I think also Danish word for car is bil. And at first it really made me wonder why. The German word for that is Auto, which is short for automobil, just like the English word automobile. So obviously bil is that last part of that word that represents the entire word. And that's why in Scandinavia, if you drive around in one of those vehicles, you drive around in a bil. Here's a very commonly used word that is very different in all three of those languages. So the Scandinavian words for woman would be kvinne, or spelled either like this or like that, depending on which country you're in, and but pretty much pronounced the same, kvinne. And in German, we have a very different word, Frau, die Frau. So even though that's a very common word and these languages are so closely related, in this case, we have a very different word. Not sure why, it just is. Here's another fun one, at least to me it's fun. Child. The Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish word for child is barn, or barn, depending on what part of Scandinavia you're in. And in German, it's kind. And again, these don't seem to be related to one another, but there are relationships. So in Scotland, they have a special word for a small child, a young child. Maybe also Northern England, I would think, since Scottish varieties and Northern English varieties are also somewhat closely related. So that would be Bern. Bern is a baby or a young child. So we have the Scandinavian word in Great Britain as well, in the English-speaking world, since a lot of Scandinavians did settle in Scotland and Northern England and around the islands. And in German, the word Kind may seem unrelated, but in English, we also have the word kin, which is relations, right? Relatives. So kind, a child, obviously someone's relative, someone's child. So there you have that connection. Okay, one more. Tooth in Norwegian would be tann, and in German it's zahn. So again, we have that German t sound represented by this letter, which is closely related to the letter T. And in fact, it just evolved in German because there were some sound changes in German history, in early German history. Or how about this one, church? In Norwegian, that would be kirke, just like the Scottish word kirk. And in German, we have Kirche, die Kirche. It's a feminine word. And last but not least, one that surprises me a little bit. How about the word for not, as in this is not good? That sentence construction in Norwegian and in Danish, I would use the word ikke, and in Swedish, it would be inte, and in German, it's nicht, which is more closely related to English. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like and check out my other videos. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so, if you do enjoy my videos. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Thanks. Thank you very much. Danke sehr. Tusen Dank.